It's now 4 o'clock. The room has been filling up. We've only got an hour, so I think if everybody's happy with it, we'll start. Just before we start, I'd like to let everyone know that we're recording this session. So if you'd rather keep your cameras off, we completely understand. As we're recording, we would be grateful if everyone could refrain from naming names and perhaps accidentally defaming an individual. Can we ask everyone to keep their mics off unless we ask you to come into the conversation? Mark Simpson, the sacred Mark Simpson, is room wrangling for us this afternoon. So if you have a question you would like to ask quietly, please directly message him. Welcome and thank you for coming to this joint session between the PMF Production Managers Forum and Rose Bruford College. We hope this will be part of a series of meetings in the weeks and months to come discussing the Reset Better question. Reset Better is a working title of a group. Well, it's not a working title, it's now actually the title of a project supported by the PMF whose aims are to promote cultural change in the way we have traditionally produced theatre. In practical terms, we seek to find ways to promote 5-day working weeks, 2-session days, job flexibility, and smarter working practices for the benefit of all stakeholders. We have produced a charter that will be put in the chat and that hopefully will be of interest to you and that you might in fact feel has some pertinence to your working experiences. Our audience today comprises graduate students and students from Rose Bruford, from a selection of courses, as well as colleagues from all sectors of the industry. The session is only an hour, so it will fly by. At the end, we were going to drop as we go through, we're going to drop links into the chat, which hopefully will be of use to you. If you have any questions, please just pop them into the chat and we'll try and address them as we go along, and maybe we'll have a bit of a Q&A session at the end. I think that covers everything, so let me just introduce the panel. Emma Wilson is Deputy Director of Technical and Production at the Royal Opera House. Oh yes, please wave, as Emma did when being introduced. Emma's main focus is sustainability, diversity, and safety. Quoting from the stage this week, Emma said, if we're going to pull ourselves together and step forwards into the future, we have to remake some of the things which we have never had time to address before. We were always exhausted, always working too long hours, and this is a moment when we have paused to open our eyes, have a look at the things we need to change, be brave and do that now. Prior to her move to the Royal Opera House, Emma was the technical director at Sadler's Wells for 20 years, where I had the opportunity to work with her often. David Ripley.
I'm not that old. 10 years.
Oh, why did you get to, I thought I read 20 somewhere.
I was there for 20 years, but I was very, very young.
You were precocious, actually.
Precocious, yes.
David Ripley is the head of technical and production at Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. He has been a theatre consultant and was previously production manager at RCS and the Haymarket in Basingstoke. For the past 20 years, he has provided AutoCAD training for the performance industry as CAD for theatre. It would be fair to say that he really is CAD for theatre. And as the author of AutoCAD, a handbook for theatre users. Miguel Edwards is a London-based production manager with over 15 years experience, including 9 years as technical manager of the Burnley Grant Arts Centre and running his own events company, Omega Events Productions. His current role is as production manager for Lift, where he's delivered a wide range of projects. He has, in addition, delivered a wide range of projects with some of the UK's top theatre makers, including the Royal Court, Rambert, Tallower, and most recently Fuel on the critically acclaimed UK tour and international presentation of Barbershop Chronicles. He's due to begin working on a new production at the National Theatre as production manager in early 2001. And he's also the diversity advocate for the PMF. His boss in 2001 will be Paul Handley, who is the production and technical director at the National, where he's also spent time as a production manager. Before he was head of production at the National, he was the head of production at the Royal Court for many years and also worked on numerous commercial productions in the West End. Rachel Duffy is the resident production manager for Devon-based NPO Theatre Alibi, a freelance lighting designer, and she's on the Reset Better working group. She's worked as a production manager for Theatre Royal Bath, zoo venues at the Edinburgh Fringe, as well as working with the Bristol Old Vic and the Wardrobe Ensemble. She came into production management over 10 years ago and started as a technician and stage manager. And finally, Mark Shale, known as Shady to many of you, familiar to many of you here at Rose Bruford, where he works with the stage management students. On the road, Mark is a company manager and production manager with 3 decades of experience. His list of credits is extensive, from the West End to Korea, and from ATG to ETT. When the great pause descended, Mark famously grew a very dramatic beard and produced 14 episodes of a podcast, The Production Meeting, which certainly helped my mental health during the first lockdown. He knows about the treadmill that has found us in bad practices and patterns of behavior, and said himself that prior to the pandemic, he thought that people just needed to get on with it. He has subsequently changed his mind and is one of the people leading on Reset Better. Indeed, like Emma, he is in the stage this week talking about just that. Yesterday, we passed the 1-year anniversary of our industry's closure, but the industry has not been inactive, and I hope that this conversation will prove that. So I think we'll dive straight in, and we'll ask Mark to address this. You are a freelancer, and you employ freelancers. Does the industry's methodology of keeping 72% of the workforce freelance make it harder to put people's needs and concerns at the forefront when relationships are short and people do not want to rock the boat so they don't jeopardize future employment?
Yeah, I don't think the industry per se is keeping 72%. I think we are and always have been, a freelance-based industry. The difficulty, of course, as freelancers is we go from job to job, so we never necessarily build up that ongoing employee-employer relationship where we could start thinking about, as other industries do, about better work-life balance, which is the phrase that I think is what we're talking about, work-life balance. Whereas individuals as employees working for organisations other than theatre will generally have HR departments and paid annual leave and sick benefits and all that kind of stuff. As freelancers, we're in a very different kind of neck of the woods, and I don't per se have a problem with that. We have certain perks and benefits to that. I love being a freelancer. I don't fare well working for organisations, but it is fair to say that as a freelancer and as a freelance-based industry, we are very much on the whim of the next job. And for many of us, we're going from job to job to job very, very quickly, running multiple jobs simultaneously. And that starts to take a toll, I think, quite quickly on freelancers. I think a lot of freelancers, the thought of taking holiday, for instance, seems an anathema because, well, if I'm away and my phone's off, then I'm going to miss out on a job. That doesn't seem to a terribly healthy way to live. Yeah, I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, David, but I think we need to be minded as an industry that we rely heavily on freelancers, but we as freelancers have an ongoing obligation to balance our lives up a little bit more, maybe, than we've currently been able to do. I don't know if that kind of helps contextualize that a little bit.
I think that's very true. I think one element of it is, of course, that a lot of the freelancers are not perhaps as established as yourself and people at the other end of their professions, and that there's a very limited amount of protection for people who are entering the industry, and their only option is to be freelance. And
Yes, and as a result, certainly I think for early career folk, there is a temptation, isn't there, to just take every job, to work all the hours that God sends and that are available, at the expense of your own personal, your health, your mental health in particular, your ability to form relationships, healthy ones outside of our industry, family life, all these kind of questions. I think are very much tied into the early stage career freelancer. So it's an issue, and I have to say I loved Emma's quote in the stage there about now we've maybe got the time to think about things, to get it right in the go back. That, to me, I'm hoping, is why those of us in the PMF are talking about this concept of Reset Better. We have this moment in time, this unique once in a generation moment to make it better next time, and not just throw ourselves back in the deep end of the pool and start drowning again. Let's just be a little bit more conscious and a little bit kinder to each other. And that's certainly very much where I sit in the conversations we've been having at PMF and in wider forums, just trying to make the industry that we all love and we're desperate to work in again kinder, better. when we go back. And I'm just sick. I don't want to ever have the conversations with colleagues about their breakdowns, their burnouts, their poor mental health, their anxiety attacks, their depression. I don't want us to be in that industry. There's no reason to be. We shouldn't be working ourselves into these early graves or leaving careers early through poor health. So that's very much where I sit in this. I'm really excited to be in this panel with some really interesting people in this. So I'm going to shut up because I'm desperate to hear what other people are doing to maybe further this agenda, so that we do go back to hopefully a more kinder, more rounded, and more human-centric industry. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Mark. Rachel, your main area of work is small and middle scale. Firstly, have you identified in that work some of these problems that we're talking about, and are people doing anything to address it at the moment?
So I was thinking a little bit about this, and yes, the company I work for, I think, will not have that much problem in signing the charter, because they already do a lot of the stuff that it's essentially suggesting. And I think one of the cruxes of it, if you go and read it, is that it's not asking people to sign up to a list of demands. It's asking people just to sit and consider where their commitments are.
Could you explain what the charter is then?
The charter, which if you go to the chat, I think Mark's put a link for it, is something that we've been working on for a few weeks now, and it's what we're asking companies and individuals to sign up to suggest that they will commit to being more human-centric in their thinking, to consider people in the way they work, to consider the people they work with in the way they work. And that's not saying that we're demanding that they work in a certain way, but that they think about it. And we're going to suggest some things that they could take forward. So we're going to produce a set of principles which are suggestions and considerations. But we're not saying that people should have to do those things, but that they're things that you could think about. So things that we're doing. So the problems that we talked about in the last panel discussion, which I wasn't on, but I attended, we talked about all those problems, and they exist at every level of the industry. So those problems exist at the small scale end and at the large scale end. We're no different. We've got those problems as well. I'm really fortunate to work for a company who have existed for 35 years, and as a result, they've kind of developed over time a sort of style of working that's not particularly traditional, but because we work in the industry we work in, and we work with freelancers and creatives, so there's elements of it that have got a traditional framework. So there's still downsides to where we work. And me coming into the company 5 years ago, I'm now thinking, did I bring some of my traditional outlook into that working practice? And some of it was probably positive, but actually a lot of it probably didn't have a particularly positive impact on the working practice. And I'm going to go back and look at what I've shifted just by the very nature of my doing my job and writing schedules and who I call into work, and how have I shifted negativity into the way that we're working. And I'm going to think about that. But some of the positive things about the way they work is, and these are not things that you might necessarily be able to do because of the way your work is structured, but they're things you can think about, I think, and things that you can, consider is elements of that ethos that you can take forward. So we articulate our process quite early on, and it is quite a collaborative way of working. But from the get-go of the conception of a project, I will be involved in that, and the designers and the directors and me and the producer will all be looking at scheduling and budgets together. So that when we're talking with designers, I already know how much time I'm going to be able to tell them they've got to work on something, how many people potentially they're going to have to work with them, and if that, and if they've got ideas that mean that that's got to shift, then we can have those conversations as we're moving along. We're thinking about that from like months before we actually get to where a project's in like a rehearsal type phase. I also do a thing with the team where we're quite close. So in rehearsals, for example, every morning we have a meeting with the team. So me and the makers and the stage management, we'll have a little meeting. And obviously it's a small team because we're small scale. but it means that for that day, we know how the shape of the day is going to work. We know what the priorities are. We talk about who's going to need fittings, who needs to work on stuff. One of the casts going to be not using something, so it can be worked on. And that means that everyone can roll their breaks to fit that. So I'm not asking somebody to skip a break because something needs working on drastically, because it's been talked about that morning. So they know that they've got a prop to work on from 1 till 2. So maybe that they'll take their break 12 till 1 instead. So that's all sort of come about because of the years of working on practice, and we keep working on stuff. The other thing is that they've got a really in-depth evaluation process. So one of the reasons the way we've worked as developed is because we look at how we've worked at the end of the project, and we look at what we can take forward. And we don't just do, I've worked for companies who do a debrief, which is like everyone in a meeting, do a debrief and leave. This is much more structured. So everybody who's worked on the project gets the opportunity to do an individual bit of feedback about what they enjoyed and what they didn't like about the project. And it's completely open. Like you can say what you like in that meeting. And then we have a permanent members of staff meeting to then debrief the whole project. And we really work on those lessons learned and take them forward to the next project.
So, I mean,
those are the things.
So I mean, it's quite a horizontal structure you're talking about there, and also respecting everybody's.
There is still hierarchy within it. Don't get me wrong, there definitely is. But I know that it's a lot more collaborative than other companies traditionally work, and it's got its benefits. It definitely has. There is still definitely hierarchy. You know, I don't have input on the design of the show. What I've got is an eye on how logistically that design's going to work.
Because I mean, one thing certainly, when I started out doing small scale theatre and looking back on it, the demand on the sort of the one technician that was very, very heavy, and as the shows got bigger and I got bigger, the pressure on the individual seemed to reduce. Mm. Is that I mean, not necessarily in your particular situation, but in the scale that you're most familiar with?
Yeah, I think there is a danger in some of this very smaller end of the industry that people are expected to do too much within their job descriptions get squished, so that you have one stage manager and they do all the stage management roles plus technician operating roles plus driving a van. And one thing I think that when we're writing I'm looking at the set of principles for small scale work, and I'm going to be talking about is when you're looking at who's manning your shows, how are you manning them effectively? Are people going to be doing too much? So that is an issue within the small scale spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's very concerning. Miguel, you have lots of experience with working with teams from around the world through your work with Lift, and I remember when I worked with the Dance Consortium, which also worked with companies from all around the world, and I started talking about health and safety, they all sort of raised their eyebrows and sort of laughed, depending whether in a Gallic or a Brazilian way. Have you encountered lots of different working practices and things that we can perhaps learn from, or examples of bad practice with these companies?
Yeah, again, similar. I've been in environments and had meetings where I've suggested that overnight call, for example, and the company just laughed and said, we can't last that long. And I'm trying to say, no. I mean, you won't have to be here for the whole time. And it's just not heard of from the way they work. I mean, my general kind of thought on it is that I feel that some international companies, some international ways of working, some international ethos is that the general well-being and the general health is paramount. The general health and well-being of crew is paramount, and it's always at the forefront. And if, for example, things like in the US, when I've taken a show there, lunch breaks and dinner breaks is non-negotiable. And the idea of we should stagger the lunch, or maybe can we do a bit of work on the floor as we go, is it's a straight no. And then okay, in the morning can we have an extra hour? It's no. It's our staff is important. This is what we need to protect our lunch breaks. We need to protect our dinner breaks. We have to stop, put down the tools and work out and find another way of solving the problem. And I find, over in the UK, I kind of, my experience has always been, we get it done. If I work all the way through the clock, if I get it done, and that's how it is. And that's the kind of culture that I kind of grew up with, and the kind of culture and way that I used to work. And as I do more and more, and I do loads and loads and meet different kind of companies' ways of working, it's actually wrong. And health and well-being is important. I adopted a lot of when I do work now. Even when someone says to me, "Oh, but Miguel, I've got a lunch, I want to stay," and I always go, "No, just go out and get some fresh air." Even if you just leave the venue, because what you find is that we stay in the venue all the way through the clock. We don't see a bit of sunshine, and actually that has an effect on us and the way that we continue working throughout the day. And it's very surprising. And I think stuff like, for example, job roles are very clear in other practices and other ways of working around the world. As you just said, in smaller venues and smaller scenarios, one technician can do many different roles, many different jobs, drive the van, do a bit of line, do a bit of sound, and so on and so forth. Whereas actually in a lot of shows that I've brought over to the UK or we presented in the UK in Lift, they tour with the full crew. And everyone has their job role, and everyone does their job role, and everyone is protected, and everyone is only expected to do what they've signed up to do. And as production managers, many times I've taken on board a show, and suddenly I have to then take on board another element of it, and then suddenly I have to then sort out getting this and bringing that to there, and it suddenly just becomes a lot, and you find yourself that you're working on one show, and another show comes in, and so on and so forth. Whereas that's not a culture that's adopted around the world, and your breaks, your consciousness, the way that you work, what your demand is very fair and very clear. Another thing is like payment structure in what I found in other countries and other ways of working. It's at times it's very clear you get paid for your job role, whereas sometimes when you first starting out or in smaller venues, actually what a production manager is being paid in comparison to some of the bigger venues or bigger scenarios, and I'm saying some, because actually even some of the bigger scenarios still isn't great, but there is a big difference, and you're still doing the same amount of work, you're still having the same challenges, you're still having to work out things in some cases with lower budget, so it's a bit harder to work out situation, but the pay is not the same. And these things is all just like a snowball effect. Suddenly you find that you're not getting paid enough, so you do another job, and then you do another job, and then before you know it, I've been in scenarios where I've had 3 different jobs in one weekend. Now I'm in Manchester. I then have to leave one hotel in Manchester, go to another hotel in Manchester, go to another company, do a job there, then literally jump on a little flight across to Southampton to go and do another and you just get burnt out, and it's not good in the long run. And for me, that is what a lot of our friends and our family and our colleagues from across the waters get right. The health and well-being of staff.
So what you're saying in many ways is that, yes, we have significant problems in the industry, but we are often the cause of those problems. It is our attitude.
Most definitely. Again, I grew up with experience on hands-on experience and just doing and learning practice from people who've been in the industry for a very long time and are hardworking and roll up their socks, and we will get this done regardless of what we have to do it. And that's how I've been. When I was a technical manager, I done crazy stuff, not eat for the day, and till I made sure it was all done, and so on and so forth, and lifting tirelessly, the lift broken, suddenly we're going to lift the flat gets up the stairs, and so on and so forth. And it becomes, as I do more and more and I go further in my career, I suddenly start realizing actually some of that is not, some of it is very wrong. And I've got a young daughter. I've got a young daughter now, and I've got a young family, and it's having and spending time with my young daughter and being with my family often got neglected, and now with lockdown happening, I've got the chance to catch up on a lot of that, but it's now going to be how I drive going forward, and suddenly that is at the top of my priority, and that's how I want to live.
Thank you. That's just cool. I mean, David. That was a really interesting explanation of how the industry is at the moment. And, you work in education and working with individuals who, are going into this industry. And, that is not an appropriate way for them to be behaving. I mean, what is the future? These people are going to be the future decision makers and leaders. How can they be prepared for an industry influx? And what advice do we have for them? How can they reset it?
It's going to be difficult. There's no doubt about that. There's a mindset, as Miguel and everyone else has kind of said, of the show must go on, and whatever is needed to put the show on, that's what needs to be done. And also, I think, as Mark said, there is that thing when you're out there and freelancing, as 3/4 of the people are in this industry, that you will just go from job to job to job to job. You can't ever say no, because they won't ask you again. So there's that constant fear. So I think it's the drama schools. Yes, we need to address this. There are discussions at Central about this. I'm sure there are at Rose Bruford about how we do this, but it is a hearts and minds thing. But looking at it from a training point of view, we always talk about that we reflect the industry, and so it's very difficult to move wholesale for us to that kind of 2-session day, 5-day week thing when the industry is still doing whatever is required, because our students will go into an industry and suddenly go, hang on a minute, this is all new to me, what's going on? So it has to be something that works in tandem, that the industry changes and we change with them, because otherwise it's just going to end up in the same problems, and we'll have people coming out with expectations who will then, the industry expectations won't have changed, and they'll suddenly have to learn that no, actually doing a 3-session day, 6 days a week for as long as a technical period exists, that's what you have to do. And sorry that your college didn't tell you that, but that's the way the industry is. So it's got to be on both sides. And part of that, I think, for those going into the industry is knowing your value. It's knowing that you have a value that isn't just about lifting and shifting and just doing whatever someone wants. You have to be really aware of that, because as I say, you don't want to be just going from place to place to place in that fear. And I know that's really difficult when you're out there and first freelancing, but you have to realize that, as I think someone talked about, hourly rates, if you're just doing that all the time and that's all you're ever doing, financially, your hourly rate is tuppence. You're probably well below the living wage, but your hourly rate in terms of quality of life, family life, and mental health above everything else really suffers. I think in the last one I did that analogy of that, we do these resources and we can talk about resources, but people are the resource, because there's always someone else who can do it. That's the thing, and probably cheaper. And that's one of the things that we have to change in the industry as well.
You mentioned in the chat earlier that IR35 is going to change the relationship between freelancers and employers. Would you want to expand on that before a lot of these individuals go out?
Yeah, it's another lovely jolly tax thing that's changing on April the 5th. And basically it's about the revenue wanting to try and get as many people as they can on PAYE. And it's very much about what's called disguised employment. And probably the best example of that is the IT contractor in the financial services who has been working for AN Bank in the city for 20 years, has their own desk, their own computer, etc., but is a freelancer. And actually the revenue were kind of after those kind of people to say that is disguised employment. They should be on PAYE, paying national insurance, and so on and so forth. So that kind of regular thing of someone just being the production manager year in, year out on a freelance basis for a theatre company, that's also one of those things they do not want. So what Mark was talking about, as a freelancer, it's really difficult building up that real relationship with a company. That's going to kind of chip away at that, because the revenue will come in and say, Mark Shale's been working for you as a production manager on and off for the last 5 years. He is de facto an employee. He should be on PAYE. And so companies, if they don't want to get it, because obviously it costs the company national insurance, workplace pension, etc., they may be forced into saying, right, well, we'll just have to have a pool of freelancers that we employ. And then, of course, you've got every time it's, well, they've got to learn our systems, they've got to learn the way we work, and so on and so forth. So it's like I said, it's kind of chipping away at that relationship that freelancers might have with companies.
But not, freelancing works for a lot of individuals, but on the other side of it, it doesn't work so well for others. The power relationship for early career people is very different. Doesn't employment offer more protection to people, which is precisely what we're talking about here?
Absolutely, but it also has additional costs for the company doing the employing, because I can engage, being the correct term, freelancers, and their national insurance, their pension, their holiday and sick pay is their problem, and so is their public liability come to that. If I employ someone, I've got 12.5% national insurance I've got to pay. I've got statutory sick pay, holiday pay, maternity pay potentially. I've got pension contributions and their public liability. So there's a whole load of extra costs to me as an employer, being completely kind of financially driven about it, that why should I get into all that stuff if I can get someone on a freelance basis and it's kind of someone else's problem, theirs.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I was just wondering if Emma could, because Emma is in the position effectively as an employer. First of all, I mean, your quote from the stage speaks volumes. And have you been able to implement any of these changes at the Opera House? And does this can you reflect back on the achievements you did achieved at SAD as well as in working practices?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a quote on the SIPA website. It's in 10 Easy Wins about, Sustainability and Production Alliance, for those that don't know what that is, about there being, we need to get away from the fact that there is honour in breakdowns and we have funerals in our 50s because of the way that we work. And, some of the people that have spoken already have talked about the fact that this is how we work, and there is a certain pride in it, of course, but there is also a financial imperative, because that's how many of us get to make a living. And I was a freelancer before I went to Sadler's Wells. So I think as an organisation, yes, it is more expensive to employ full-time staff, and there's many organisations, people on this call, who've had to make people redundant in the last year and make very painful decisions for those individuals. But in a build-back process, we need to be looking at, and we're personally making those commitments now to, although we know that things are going to have to be flexible for a while because we don't know what the world will be like and what's going to happen with pandemics and mutations to those in the next year or two. We need to commit to good jobs for people where they can have fixed term contracts, and then we can move from fixed term contracts to permanent contracts and identify those more clearly and speak to the unions more frequently and have really open, honest conversations about those contracts, not just keep people on permanent casual contracts, if you like, which I think venues do. To keep their costs down, their core costs down, that David talked about. So we're personally having those conversations and committing to that going into the future. That's not something we can do right now, this month, but that is something that we have a moral imperative to do. So I think it's only with those kind of contracts that you're going to be able to get the mortgages and have that security and make those life decisions about, do you start a family or don't you start a family, things like that. So I think it is very much in the lap of the venues to behave and employers to behave morally and ethically as we go forwards, because this year hasn't solved all the problems, but it's given us pause to have these conversations, to have all these fora, all of these kind of seminars and webinars and all these conversations. It doesn't always solve the problem, but it does mean that we've unpicked a lot and found that there's quite a lot of ugly stuff that we need to stop and take a look at. We talked a little bit about the 2 session days just now, and the fact that wouldn't it be great if we could go to 2 session days rather than 3 session days? It doesn't work with the financial model of the venue, because that's 50% more time, and so that's fewer productions. So I don't know what the answer is. How do we as an industry start shifting towards something that accommodates people's lives in a more respectful way? We at the very least can stop doing things like overnight get-ins and overnight work, and just accept that people are not as safe working overnight. They have shorter lifespans working overnight, and we need to not just try and grab every hour we can in 24 hours because we want to get more shows, and we have to have a different financial model. Maybe we have to make different choices if we want to not treat people like cannon fodder. I think the other thing that we've had the opportunity to do with this pause is look at safety as well. There is nobody that ever needs to explain what PPE means ever again. And probably everybody on this call has had to go into a meeting, explain to a manager at some point and go, PPE, oh no, that's the budget that I need for the hard and the gloves, and you never need to explain that again, which is fantastic. I find more appetite in staff to be able to know what the risk assessments are that we've got in place for this now. And have you done have you made me safe coming to work? Have you made me safe coming back? We're getting lots of calls from unions saying, could you show us the risk assessments for the WIGS workshop when they come back? Could you show us? Yes, we can do that. We've done COVID safe risk assessments. We update them all the time, because we absolutely have to be on the front foot with this because of the how catastrophic it's been and how tragic it's been. So I think that appetite for understanding what safe working is, even if it's just around COVID, it opens up that dialogue and those conversations. It means that executive teams get it, and they get why it's important. And some of us, I was director of health and safety at Sadler's when I was technical director there, and we had a great health and safety culture there, but it does take those conversations with those different levels of the organisation to make sure that everybody at every level of the organisation, through every single strata, really gets it and understands why it's important. So I think it's enabled us to do that. It's enabled us to talk about sustainability. The work that's going on with ABTT and Theatres Trust now on the Green Book, which will be in line with the Yellow Book, so that we're looking at tools so that we can have more sustainable production. Some of us have been madly busy for a year. We haven't all stopped for the year. Some of us have been dealing with sort of structural problems and changes, but we have all been able to engage in all of these conversations because they've bubbled up. People have had time. People who have been very productive, and people have been very like some people on this call particularly, for whom work has stopped, have started these initiatives and started having these conversations. And those of us who haven't been able to stop, I can see Paul on the screen, and he and I haven't been able to stop, but it means that they're there now for us to dip into and contribute to, and I think that's been incredibly useful. And there's a lot going on with sustainability at the moment, coming back as well, talking about sustainable productions and how we change that process from the design process all the way through to disposal of set, and all the materials choices you make, the ethical choices you make. So those have been really, really good conversations, and it has, in some ways, this year hasn't solved all the problems, but it has kick-started a lot of stuff, which is fantastic, and created frameworks for conversations. And then I suppose lastly, we're talking about gender and diversity as well. People have been at home. People have, Miguel, you talked about being at home with your family, and that's given people pause for thought as well about how we value our life outside work, whatever that may be, whether it's with family or whether it's other choices or other lives. And that has, I think, if not solved every problem, at least started those conversations in the workplace about how we look at working hours, how we look at job shares, how we look at people's right to have a life outside work. This has given us pause. And I think there's a lot of really valuable conversations started, and some really good work happening with organisations and with venues and with individuals and with sort of pressure groups. And I think there's a momentum now. There's a momentum in all of these things simultaneously, whereas before it felt very piecemeal. But it feels like we've got this huge moral imperative now in all sorts of areas to really push forward.
A sense of responsibility that has come in, and we've sort of got off the treadmill. And Paul, the Nationals treadmill would have been is one of the more dramatic ones, and you've you had a chance to sort of step back from that. Have you been able to make any changes to sort of foreground, I know that you've been doing a lot of work in sustainability, and foreground people in the decisions and the structures you're putting into place?
Well, I think a lot of people would say not, because we made 25 to 30% of them redundant. And of course, that was, a horrible and an ugly process, and done in a big hurry. So, it's interesting, the notion of the great pause. I don't think I've had a busier working life in my whole 30 years working in this business. It's been totally nuts. But I love that these conversations going on, and I truly believe that collective will can really change things if we can make it wide enough. There is some stuff that we are going to do, and of course we've had to do a lot of reassuring of the remaining staff that we're not going to sacrifice welfare, given that we've lost so many staff, in the pursuit of any kind of business as usual. Business as usual is really not an option, and I think we do really all accept that. Emma's alluded to a lot of the issues that relate to the economies of a big organisation. You know, the National Theatre is kind of phobic of dark nights because it relies on that income so much, and that income is significant in those big auditoria. So that's not going to change instantly, but I think and I think, Joe, you mentioned that freelancers need to do. You know, you don't want these production periods to be extended too far. In fact, that came up recently in a meeting we had about a show where, because of COVID working and trying to keep all the departments separate, the production period has extended just to make it a safer working environment. Of course, the freelancers said, well, where's our remuneration for that? You're not paying us anymore. The fees are still fixed. So I think, certainly for me, one of the biggest issues that this year has really thrown up is this relationship between the buildings and the freelancers. I think it really needs sorting out because we're completely mutually dependent. And at the moment, it feels like there's a real schism because of the lack of equity between the two groups in this period. So I think we are going to fix loads of stuff. There is no going back. I'm particularly interested in sustainability, as someone's mentioned, and I do think that that gives us a gateway into changing all sorts of things about our practice. It is, as the Sustainability and Production Alliance have said for so many years, it isn't just about environment, it is about the whole thing, and they are all interlinked. Emma and I were in a conversation only the other day about how we're never going to get inclusion and representation right while we all do these stupid hours. It is exclusive to think that the only way to exist in this industry is to work a 70 or 80 hour week. Certainly at the National, we will not do 3-session tech days anymore. We'll only ever do 2-session tech days, but it doesn't still mean that there will be freelancers, lighting designers, lighting programmers who will be doing those long days. But we're increasingly, I hope, going to push, even with reduced staffing, towards, you know, shift patterns and losing our kind of addiction to thinking that you have to have one person consistently through the process. Production managers do really need looking after, because we know, I spent a quarter of a century being one that, first in, last out, and they've never been protected, not by unions, not by anything. And I think we really need to look at that. It's a tough profession to exist in at the best of times, and I think there needs to be a shifting of attitudes. I think, as many of you have said, the notion of the show must go on needs recalibrating. Because that is a culture we've existed in by any means necessary, whether it means dragging things out of skips in the middle of the night or, well, the list is endless. So I'm hopeful that we can affect some change. I think this year has been a big wake up to the whole industry about the things that we do really badly. I've said in various meetings, I think it's a danger that we work in the arts. A lot of us read The Guardian. We all think we're decent thinking liberals. And it causes us to forget to really look at who we really are and what our practices are and where there are faults. And I think we've woken up to the fact that there are so many things to fix in this period. I'm confident that we will fix a big chunk of them, if not all of them. And yeah, putting people first is definitely a mantra that is creeping into every conversation we have about work going forward. But it's really difficult because, again, what I can see in the future, I mean, it's already happening at the National, is a kind of level of conflict between artistic ambition and the freelancers coming into the building, whose next jobs are often predicated on how well they do the current job. As a freelancer, you genuinely are only as good as your last job. And a lot of designers and directors have verbalized that to me in a very clear way. How we balance that with welfare of the staff supporting those projects again, I think it can be done by, a key word is collaboration, and inclusion of everyone at an early stage in the process. I think too often people are let in too late in the process to really have a significant or meaningful contribution, and are just landed with this sort of, as one director put it, actually, a sort of command and obey culture where you've got to do it. We're the associate artists at the National, alongside Rufus, the artistic director, and his new deputy, Clint Dyer. We're in a series of meetings where we're starting to look at the production timeline from beginning to end and work out how to improve it. I think the white card moment is, to my mind, under real scrutiny, because I think where it sits with us, and that's, for us, it's still 3 months away from having to deliver it on stage. But even at that point, it's often too late to really control the ambition of it and the implications it has for everyone working on it. And I think we want to include people a lot earlier and get the ambition of a production discussed much earlier, so that everyone does feel part of that. It's possible.
Well, that would be. It's interesting how, as we go through the scales, the challenges are the same, and we've all been saying for years, the earlier everybody engages in these conversations, the better. We've had a question from our participant, which you have, of course, partly addressed, but just to make it a bit wider. Does the show have to go on? Surely the health and well-being of freelancers is more of a priority. The fit up of the show would be more efficient and with more frequent breaks instead of burning all the crew out on the first day. Changes in production schedule could be a way forward to help create a change within the industry. What do we all think of that?
I think breaks, Miguel reminded me of the fact there are loads of countries in the world that have got this absolutely right, where breaks are sacrosanct. And I think even at the National, where in the past we've had enough people to offset breaks and generally support them, it is still an issue, and it's an issue of attitude. I think everyone feels so responsible that unless you really enforce them in a very strong way, people, through their own sense of personal responsibility, stage managers are the worst, will work through their breaks because there is always something to do. So and that's something we're going to be focusing on a lot in the new world.
It's interesting. I've done a bit in America, and I did find there, 3 hours, 45 minutes, and then it's a wash up, rather frustrating. But in retrospect, I feel that they have focus for whatever reason, and the quality of life of everybody who works backstage is very high. And I think that's rather enviable. Mark, what do you think of this?
Oh, you caught me on the hop there. Yes, I've been nodding away, and Paul's absolutely right. Speaking as a stage manager in the room, we are the worst. We do breach these breaks all the time because we work in that. It's, we've not got enough time. We've not been brought in early enough. I think the early enough coming in pre-white card so that everyone has stake and Paul, you said, which I thought was really lovely, discussing the ambition. We should be doing this collaboratively. The whole kind of turning up on the first day of rehearsal with a fait accompli production, which has clearly got a potty production schedule, and you're just about to go into an 80-hour week for the next 6 weeks, is lunacy. That's an easy fix. That's a super easy fix, because we will get better art if we've got more people in the room earlier on to collaboratively engage together. We are ultimately all on the same side, and I think sometimes we forget that, don't we? Especially with, and no disrespect to any directors that may be in the room, we all have to be on the same side. And I think we come very much, don't we, from a culture of producers mandate on budget, but director's mandate in creative vision, follow me chaps over the top, and we all get mown down in the crossfire, and that's not right anymore. I absolutely get that. And Emma talked about, and we've been bandying this phrase around a lot today, the moral imperative. We're at that point now, aren't we? Having had the year to think about it, there's a moral imperative that we aren't throwing ourselves under the wheels of this runaway train of theatre. It's damaging damaging to all of us. So yeah, I'm sort of really heartened by it, and I'm excited by it, actually, particularly with Paul and Emma talking about those big headline companies where those conversations are happening. Please God, that trickles right the way through to the rest of us. I think it's coming from the smaller scale where we're all working on the ground and the lead companies, but we're all singing from the same song of moral imperative. That can only be a good thing, I suspect.
Mark Johnson's made a couple of good points in the chat. I was wondering, Mark, if you wouldn't mind just opening up and addressing that child-friendly point you made, and also the hour-and-a-half break, if you're still listening.
Let me unmute.
There we are. Hello, love.
I really loved working at the Liverpool Everyman. We were putting on Sweeney Todd, and we did a child-friendly. That meant parents in the company could get back to their kids in time to feed them supper, although quite a lot of the actors seemed to go to the pub next door. But it did mean, the bonus for me was that we could actually do some lighting to keep up in the tech. We were doing a musical, but the total number of days that I was involved on the show was 30. The fee appeared to be good, reasonable, but I was expecting to do the job in about 17 or 18 days.
Oh, wow.
30, it was not a reasonable fee. So I realized I'm going to have to ask more carefully about when the tech starts. And so I would urge production managers who are resident with companies to encourage their contracting managers or whoever's doing the contracts to think really about the number of days that lighting designers or other freelancers, it's going to be the same for the video and the sound and so on, costume supervisors as well, I'm sure, how many days we're really going to be involved for, because we are way behind on pay. And when you stay for longer days, of course, that's many more meals that you've got to buy as well.
Yeah.
But I'm a supporter of the idea. I'm also mentioned that I'm a supporter of at least the 90-minute meal break, which is standard with some companies, but not with all. If you get 90 minutes, there's a chance that you can persuade your programmer or your stage manager to go out for lunch, and they can get back in time for a reset or to catch up or light the next cue that you need for the afternoon technical.
Yeah, I mean, also, we've all worked on a Sunday. Trying to get lunch on a Sunday in 60 minutes is just absolutely impossible. I think it's really interesting, the whole, it needs to be a kind of complete conversation, doesn't it? It's relatively easy to look at in-house staff, but to actually make sure that freelancers are protected in the same way. And it's not just a matter of them being, having to do fewer shows. I think makes a big difference. There were some comments in here about costume, which I haven't read, but Emma, did you read them? You've been busy answering things, I notice. David,
yeah, and I was just going to address a couple of things that we're talking about. We've been talking about 2 session days and things like that, and making, having better quality of life for family. And there've been comments quite rightly coming up saying, but that doesn't necessarily work for freelancers. And we've just had some comments about, well, that just means a longer period away. And so is it, we need to be imaginative about how we do that. That if we've got 70% of our industry is freelancers and casual staff, and 30% is venue based, then do we need to think about a variety of solutions? The solutions that people that are doing 52 weeks in a row have a different kind of working pattern, and those that are freelancers have the option to have shorter, more condensed periods of work. I don't think there's one answer, is there? I think there has to be a variety of answers, but we as employers need to be open to all of those different inputs, make sure people are being paid reasonably for what they're doing, and it's just not extending that fee over a longer period of time, and that we have transparent fee structures as well, so we have equality. We don't have hidden fees, and women will find out that they're getting paid less than men for the same job, and so on and so forth. But I think it's beholden upon us to have those conversations and to listen to that. And if we are going to have an industry that has a we can't just all go home at 6 o'clock in the evening. It's just not going to happen. We're going to have far fewer shows, and our entire financial model is going to have to change, and the entire structure of the Arts Council is going to have to change. You know, so with that in mind, do we need to be more imaginative with the structure that we've got, and listen to our creative teams, and listen to our freelancers, and listen to our venue staff, and work out models that can blend and that can work for all of those people who have different working patterns.
Thank you. Mr. Shell, you have your hand up.
I'm nodding away with everything that Emma's saying, because I think there is no one size that fits all. There isn't a solution to the problem that we're all kind of articulating. But I think what we all know is there is a problem, and all we have the option to do really is to kind of try and put out every fire that's in front of us when we get to it. And sometimes we're not going to get to. I mean, I would love to be in a world where I worked a 5-day week, 2-session day, got paid well, and went I could go for a lovely walk in the park on Sundays and do my laundry on Saturdays. Lovely. But I'm a realist as well. But the very fact is, we know there's a problem that needs addressing. It does need everybody in the room to do that. And, you know, freelance lighting, and Marco quite rightly talks about that, you know, that length of time, that's a killer. So there's a conversation to be had there about what the fee structure is. For folk that are on, when I'm on an equity contract, there are mandatory breaks that I'm required to take them. But I haven't in the past, and nor have my colleagues. That's something we can fix very quickly ourselves. That's something we don't need management and contracts and union to get involved with. That's a mindset. So I think that it's just going to be all these kind of little coming at this problem from all these different dimensions to ultimately move us to a more, I keep using the phrase kinder theatre, but certainly a theatre where we're not all we're not living under the cosh that we've been talking about today and have been talking about over the last few months.
What is the role of unions in this? David Asen brings this up earlier. Any opinion? I mean, you know, they are there to protect their members, admittedly, though they have been, you know, quite open. Some of them have been quite open about trying to protect and support everybody during this period, at least. Any opinions about it? Paul, you were nodding.
Unmute. No, I think the unions do, of course, have a big role to play in this, but it can't just be on them. You know, it's like all these problems. The brilliance of the Green Book, which you've put in the chat, which everyone needs to read, is that it's a real you know, step forward after years of talking about this. And one of its primary things is that no one's absolved from responsibility. And I think it's the same with this. It can't just be left to the unions. It just needs to be a conversation between all of us, between managements. But of course, unions have a big role to play in it.
Sorry. David Ripley, you have your hand up, then Rachel.
I think I'm really just reflecting what Lucy's put in the chat, because I think it's great for us to have this thing, but we know that the creatives want all the time there is, plus a bit more. And so there's got to be a education bit of work done with creatives of all sorts in all venues to actually say, look, you still will get the same show. We'll just all be slightly more sane at the end of it on opening night. Because at the moment, you know, if people are going to say, right, we're going to go down this line, the 2 sessions and all that kind of thing, there's just going to be such massive resistance. We have to take these people with us. Otherwise, it's just going to be a complete clash of heads. And that's something that once we've got those principles in place, that's what we need to start rolling out, which is kind of what we're looking at central of getting those principles involved, talking to people and maybe running some pilots and easing it in rather than a big bang, which would be just too scary for most people, I think.
Just to pick up on that, can we have Katie and then we'll go to you, Rachel? And before Katie even, people have been going on about this discrepancy and lack of support for freelancers for a very long time and have done some fantastic work, but obviously there's a huge amount more to do. Katie?
I think it is, just touching on what Lucy's put in the chat, I think it's also having the confidence to talk to your management. So I will challenge people if I think that they're treating me unfairly or I'm not getting, you know, a fair pay or whatever. I'm not afraid to challenge that. If I don't work for them again, then I don't want to work for them. Like, that's the bottom line, really. But I think if we did introduce managers not to this conversation, it would give people who are more anxious about that or feel they can't speak out or whatever, a place to be able to do that as a group, and also that we address it in a way that's not us and them, but like, welcome to the conversation, here's where we're all at, how do you feel? Because quite often what I find is that people just didn't know or didn't expect that I would be working that many hours, or that I feel like this thing's been taken advantage of. And especially on the smaller scale theatres where you don't have people managed by UK Theatre or SALT, and you know, typically quite often producers are quite young and people running the theatres are, it's not often the same structure as is in the bigger houses. Like one theatre I work at doesn't even have a producer. It's sort of like, who do you go to in that time? They just don't know. So inviting them into the conversation, I think, is really crucial.
Thank you. Just with 1 minute to go before the end of this, Rachel, very quickly, if you would.
I don't know if mine's a great thing to end on. I was just going back to unions in that. So for my end of the industry, we work on an ITC equity agreement, and we're classed as an ethical employer because we sign up to their thing. And I don't think their contracts are that ethical. I think we should treat them as a bare minimum. You know, I think, and I feel like sometimes with union contracts, you look at what the hours are and you try to squeeze every ounce out of those allowed hours that you possibly can. You go, oh, I can get 43 hours out of this week and I've got 42.5, where can I squeeze extra half an hour in? So that's a cultural shift that we need to do, and not rely on the union rules, and you know, rather than, don't look at those frameworks as a commodity to be squeezed to death. I think is something you've got to come at it from the other angle, as like, what do I need, rather than what can I get out of it.
I think that's a very good point. And with this hour, many of the students are with us who are going to leave. We can continue. If people want to stay in the room afterwards, they're very welcome to. But I think we just take this opportunity to thank the panel for some very clear thinking and some insights into where we're at. And the clear message is that, you know, we are in many ways our own worst enemies, and we need to find ways to actually start, you know, value each other and as much as value ourselves. But thank you, everybody. This is now the end of this session, but anybody would like to stay on to chat more, as we did a couple of weeks ago, please do so. But thank you for the panel.